Welcome back. Good morning. Hey, for this Thursday now, we are going to be, reviewing. Again, too quickly or too slowly here, but man, for these first couple lessons here in this Wednesday, this short day week, there's a lot of information packed in, and I just really want to make sure we're not moving too far ahead. So we just got a little bit of review, and I would strongly suggest you open your Science 110. We're going to, if you notice, here's your assignment. I would strongly suggest you do this while watching the video, because you can always pause the video and write down a couple things. But if you notice, I try to give you guys some, because I told you exactly what the page numbers are, and you see this little heading right here? Those are the exact headings you're going to find in the book, and so that can help you where I'm asking you to write two interesting. Please just don't write one-word answers like needs of living things, food and water. Okay? Yes, you're right. Number one, you didn't really write it in a sentence. And number two, I think I can argue that's not that interesting. Really trying to find out what you've learned by watching these videos and by looking through them. I say write down two interesting facts. Pick things in this section that really struck out that maybe you didn't know, maybe you found interesting, and again, write in full sentences, please. So let's Tuesday, huh? In an ecosystem, if it's balanced, Chipmunk's got to have everything it needs. It needs to have food. It needs to have air, which we get from plants, right? And there needs to have water. It needs to have shelter. Unfortunately, it also has those that hunt it. This is what keeps a nice ecosystem balanced. If you would completely take out these plants, the chipmunk wouldn't live, because that needs the nuts from the plants in order to survive, and then this hawk needs the chipmunks and other herbivores in order to survive. And so you got to understand how these food chains work. If you take out one of the lower levels, it completely ruins the entire food chain. If you take out the sun completely, we don't have plants, then we don't have herbivores, then we don't have carnivores, right? So it needs the right kind of conditions. Yes, some animals can adapt well to different ecosystems in different places, but not all. Like the prickly pear, not going to survive in the tundra, right? Most animals that survive in the tundra cannot survive. There's a reason we have a lot of different animals that are only in the tropical rainforest, because they need that type of climate. They need those different things. So this is when we're balancing ecosystems, right? An ecosystem can be nice and balanced even if we have all these different animals, all these different herbivores, all these different things that need the plants to survive. It can still be balanced as long as there is enough plants. If all of a sudden the plants, we don't have very many, and there's way too many herbivores, well, the herbivores are going to start dying off because they need the plants to survive, right? If you don't have any herbivores, you don't have any carnivores. That's why we talk about this desert ecosystem. I know there's not a lot of plants in our dry ecosystem, but there still is enough to survive, which is why we have rabbits and we have rodents and we have the other herbivores, because they can survive just fine in a desert ecosystem, which is also why we have the carnivores. We have the roadrunners, we have the hawks, we have the snakes. It's nice and balanced there, and the food web can be just fine as long as there is enough to go around. If we take out far less plants, we're in a severe drought, there's going to be far less herbivores, which means there's going to be carnivores, because they don't have enough food to survive. They'll literally die off, or they'll move to some other ecosystem where there are enough things. I know we talked about this a lot, but if we don't have any herbivores, you're not going to have a lot of carnivores. They're actually going to die off. And when those die off, all of a sudden the herbivores can rebound and reproduce, because there's not nearly as many things eating them, right? But when the herbivores come back, so come back the carnivores, because finally have enough to eat. And eventually it gets nice and balanced out. There's enough plants for the herbivores to eat, there's enough herbivores for the carnivores to eat, and everybody's happy. But if all of a sudden the carnivores are eating way too much, there's going to be far less herbivores. And when the herbivores get less and less, there's not enough food for the carnivores, because they need to compete to eat too. And so the carnivores start to die off. When the carnivores, the herbivores come back, so on and so forth. But that's just the common thing with an ecosystem and how they're imbalanced. Now, when we talked about this, as long as the living thing has enough. If the plants have enough sun, they're good. If the herbivores have enough grass to go around, they're good. If the carnivores have enough herbivores to go around, they're good, and it's a nice, balanced, even ecosystem. There's sometimes where the ecosystems can change drastically. Just like this, very few plants, which means there's very few herbivores, very few carnivores. But when water comes in, especially when we're in the monsoon season and there's consistent monsoon seasons, all of a sudden we get a lot more plants almost overnight, which means herbivores come back in, which means carnivores come back in. But if there's no plants at all, there's no herbivores and there's no carnivores. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. If you take the plants part out of the food chain, there's nothing else. Which is why every food chain has to start from the bottom, which starts sun, then plants, then herbivores, in this case the javelina, then carnivores, in this case the coyote, right? If you would take out the javelina, there wouldn't be any carnivores because all they want to eat. They're not going to all of a sudden skip down to here and start eating plants. They can't. They can't. If you would take out the plants, well then you take out the carnivores and the javelina, because all we have is the sun, and then we're back to something like this where there's no plants, which means no carnivores. But even in the desert, as long as you have what animals need to sustain life, you will find animals. Right here, there is water, which every living thing needs, so there's plants. Well, if there's plants and water, there's going to be herbivores. And if there's plants and water and herbivores, there's going to be carnivores. That's how the ecosystem works. Now, every living thing, including humans, need what they need. Air, water, food. If they have it, they can thrive and reproduce. If they don't have it, sorry, cruel world out there, but things are going to die. Notice, the reason this herbivore died is because there's no plants. If there's no plants, there's no herbivores, there's no carnivores. Just like we have in the rainforest. It is so diverse because there's so many different plants, which means there's so many different herbivores, which means there's so many different carnivores. No plants. Now, I know we talked about this in the past, about survival and competition in the animal world. If there's 14 of us and 14 Twinkies, we're going to be okay because we can share. If there's 22 Twinkies, well, hey, now we're really cooking because we each get a full Twinkie and there's some extras. But if there's 14 of us, only 5 Twinkies, then there's going to be some issues. Then there's going to be some competition because we need to survive and we need food to survive. That's how it is in the animal world as well. There's a lot of competition for food. Sometimes there's competition against different populations in the community, like in this case the hyenas against the lion. They're both fighting and competing for the same thing. They both need food to survive. Notice there are plants, herbivores, which means of course there's carnivores. Sometimes animals of the same species or the same population is going to compete. They might compete to be the alpha male. They might compete, which means the top dog. They might compete just for territory if they're territorial. But sometimes they compete against their own just for those different things. And you can understand that it's going to be the strongest and the fastest that's going to win out. But there are some animals that are together in what they call pack mentality, like wolves. They'll work together in a pack to hunt down the herbivores, share the meal. But man, you can bet sure as shooting if some other kind of animal comes in trying to get their meal, they're going to defend it like crazy, right? You also have all kinds of other examples of competition like we talked about here. The fox is never going to outrun and outbeat the lion, so they have to find slicker, sly ways, right? We talked about this with the niche. There's going to be hunters and those that are hunted. We talked about this too with sharing resources. Now these herbivores are going to start fighting and attacking each other, but you also need to understand that every last one of them need water, and there's only a little bit of water. You better get there first you better drink your fill, because if all those herbivores come and get water, and those are big animals, it's not going to be enough water to go around, right? That's why we talked about last Friday that Battle of Crew. Lions are hanging out the watering hole. It's not just some fun song in the Lion King. It's really truly, they know herbivores need water, so they're going to eventually come to the water, and then the lions can attack and get their meat. We talked about this, how both the hawk and the owl hunt for the same thing, but they don't have that direct competition because the hawk hunts during the day and the owl hunts at night. Both hunting for the same thing, but both at very different times. Now again, sometimes the animals are going to work together to help hunt, but they're going to defend, and they need to compete for that. Here's what I'm asking you guys to do. Really take a look here at these 5 different sections. I want 2 interesting facts, 2 interesting sentences for each one. I'm going to ask you guys to work hard at that. I'm going to ask you guys to have Lord's blessings here as you praise your Savior.